Now, a few weeks ago, I did a tutorial showing you how to make gum paste orchids, and I added these onto a pink buttercream cake. Now, I uploaded this picture onto my Instagram, and I mentioned that when covering my cake in buttercream, I'd used Ganache Plates or these acrylic discs, and so many of you asked for a video showing how I used them. So in this week's video tutorial, I'm going to be using my acrylic discs and showing you how I covered my cake in buttercream and got these really smooth edges and this really crisp top. Now, I do have another video tutorial showing you how I cover my cakes in buttercream where I don't use these discs, but if you do have problems getting a really smooth finish, then these plates are great. Okay, let's get started. So let's start by talking about the discs. Now, these are sometimes called Ganache Plates or acrylic discs depending on where you buy them. Now, you would usually get two discs together, so you can have one at the top and one at the bottom. The ones I've got here are 6-inch plates, but they're actually 1/4 inch larger, so they're 6 1/4 inches. Now, depending on where you buy them, some companies sell them slightly bigger, so you can get 6 1/2 inches. It just depends on how much buttercream you want around the side of your cake. Now, as well as buttercream, you can also use this for ganache or royal icing, anything you want to smooth out on the side of your cakes. Okay, so if we compare it to our cake, so I've got one of my 6-inch cakes here and I haven't trimmed it down yet. I baked this in a 6-inch tin, but it usually comes out just under 6 inches. You'll see that around the edge we have just over 1/2 centimetre running all the way around. So this is going to give you space to add your buttercream. Now, another thing you want to consider is what you'll be doing with your cake once it's covered in buttercream. Are you going to be taking it off of your ganache plate and putting it on a fondant covered cake board, for example, or are you going to be stacking your cake so you need a cake board underneath? If this is the case, then you want to make sure that the cake boards that you're using are smaller than your ganache plate. So the next thing to do is prepare my cakes. Now, I've baked 2 6-inch vanilla sponge cakes, and I will put a link in the description below to my recipe video. So I'm using my serrated knife and I'm just leveling these off at the top. Now, each of my cakes are around 2 inches in height, so I'm going to divide each one into 2. So I'm going to end up with 4 layers. After baking, I let my cakes cool and I wrap them in cling film before popping them in the fridge. This allows the cakes just to firm up to make it a lot easier to trim and cut my cakes. Once they return to room temperature, they will go back to being nice and soft and fluffy. Now, I do have another video tutorial showing how I cover my cakes in buttercream without using the ganache plates. If you don't have any ganache plates, I will put a link to this video in the description below so you can see the different techniques. For the filling and covering of my cake, I've created a batch and a half of my vanilla buttercream. Now, a little tip is if you find that you have quite a few air bubbles in your buttercream, just take your spatula and just push it against the side of your bowl, pushing those bubbles out, and this is going to give you a lot smoother of a buttercream. Now, at this point, if you are going to put your cake on a board, you want to place down either your drum board or a sturdy board. I'm actually just going to build mine on here, so I'm going to place down a really small amount of buttercream just to keep it in place. And a few of you have been asking about this board. It's just a glass chopping board that you get for the kitchen. Now, I want to make sure that my cakes are all lined up and also they're sitting flat on the top. So I've got my small spirit level. I can then cover the top and the sides. Now, this is just a thin crumb coat, and all a crumb coat is going to do is lock in any of those loose crumbs so that they don't appear in your final layer of buttercream. You then want to use a smoothing tool. Keep the bottom of the smoothing tool against the board, and I'm just going to scrape it around, keeping it tight to my cake. Once you're happy with the sides, I'm going to take my offset spatula, pulling that buttercream into the center. At this point, you can just check in that your cake is still nice and flat. And once you're happy with your crumb coat, I'm going to pop my cake in the fridge for around 20 minutes for that buttercream to firm up so that we can start using our acrylic plates. Whilst my cake is in the fridge, I'm going to prepare the acrylic disc that I'm going to use for the top. I've got a piece of parchment paper. I'm going to draw around my disc, cut this out, but I'm going to come in around 1/2 centimetre, so it's slightly smaller than the disc itself. The reason for making the piece of parchment paper slightly smaller is when we put the disc on the top of the cake, that parchment paper is going to stick. We then want to adjust the disc slightly to make sure it's in the right place. So this gives us a little bit of wiggle room so that that parchment paper isn't going to come over the edge. I'm then going to take a really small amount of buttercream and just put that in a few places around the board. Now I'm keeping it quite close to the edge. Push that on and smooth down that buttercream so that it's not going to create a dent in the top of the cake. The reason for using a piece of parchment paper on the top is we're going to add wet buttercream onto the top of our cake. If we then apply the acrylic disc straight onto this, the acrylic disc will stick and you'll find it really hard to get it off. By adding a layer of parchment paper, once the cake has come back out of the fridge, we can just peel that off. So my cake has come out of the fridge and that buttercream is firm to the touch. I'm going to start by going in with my offset spatula, releasing my cake. I'm then going to place down another piece of my non-slip mat. So this is just a non-slip mat which I've cut down into circles. Place on one of my plates. Now taking a small amount of buttercream, I'm then going to lift my cake into place and just position it on the center of that board. I'm then going to work on the top. So I've again got my buttercream and I want to get it as smooth as I possibly can. We will be neatening up the top once we take the acrylic plate off. Once that's quite smooth, I'm going to take my acrylic plate with my parchment paper, flip that over, just push that into place. Taking my scraper, you want the edge of the top plate and the bottom plate to touch. So I'm going to work my way around the cake every few inches and just pushing that top plate. Once you're happy with the positioning, we're now ready to add our buttercream. Around this top edge, take the buttercream that's there and also some extra buttercream, and I'm going to push up, and this is what is going to give us that nice edge. So just pushing that buttercream into the gap. I'm going to do exactly the same along the bottom, so just pushing it in, and I'm going to use the rest of my buttercream to fill the rest. So just as you would if you were covering a cake without the plates. You want to use a clean scraper, and the first time that we run around the cake, you don't have to go in too close, we just want to see where the gaps are. So we're going to take some of that excess buttercream off. So I can see I've got an area here which has a bit of a gap. Just fill that in. Clean off the buttercream along that edge so we've got a nice clean smoother. Holding it at a 45-degree angle to my cake, start to run it around. Now we're going to be running it around a few times, and again just filling in any areas that might have any gaps or air bubbles. Once you're happy with how that's looking all the way around, I'm going to take my offset spatula, run it around that top, taking off any excess. I'm then going to pop the cake back in the fridge for around half an hour. So my cake has come out of the fridge and that buttercream is nice and chilled. Now the next thing we need to do is get this acrylic plate off the top. So I'm going to use a small spatula, or you can use your small offset spatula. You just want something that's fairly thin. So we want to go in between the top of our cake and our plate and go on top of that piece of parchment paper. Now when you go in, if you find that you're pulling on that buttercream, then what you can do is take a glass of hot water, pop the end of your spatula in there just to warm it up, take off any excess water. We then just want to get it just under those buttercream dots that we added and then lift it off. You can then take that parchment paper and just pull that away. So our top edge has remained quite sharp. We've just got a few small areas where that buttercream has pulled and also a few dips in the top. So I'm going to take some more of my buttercream and just fill any areas that need filling. And we want to keep that top edge quite sharp. So I'm trying not to put too much pressure on the top of the cake. And then very carefully run it round, just hardly touching, just taking off any excess pieces of buttercream. So we don't want to push in and lose that neat edge. Now the next thing to do is separate it from this base plate. So I'm going to go back in with my small little palette knife. So I've taken the board off of my turntable and I've just got my cake stand which I'm going to add it onto, or if you've got a cake board, I'm going to use my normal spatulas that I use for transferring my cakes. Where we've released that buttercream from under the cake, I'm going to push in my first spatula and you can feel it moving off of that plate, and just on the other side do exactly the same thing. And then lift that off and transfer that over. Once you've transferred it over, if there are any small areas, we can just go in with a tiny bit of buttercream on our small spatula and just fill those in just to neaten up that bottom edge. So here we have the finished buttercream cake with these nice smooth sides and this really sharp top edge. I really hope you enjoyed this video tutorial and will find it useful if you want to give these acrylic discs a try yourself. Now don't forget you can use these for buttercream, ganache or even royal icing, anything you want to smooth out on the side of your cake. If you have enjoyed the video, as always, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, then don't forget to subscribe to the Cakes by Ninja YouTube channel. Now, I will be putting links in the description below to all the recipes that I've used throughout today's video and all of the tools, including where I got my Ganache plates from. So until next time, bye!